Hi everybody! Hi Itamar! We have a very interesting video today. We want to talk about the very different way that he approaches war in his story, A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. It's very different from what we're used to in fantasy stories, that usually war is at the center of them, right?
Yeah.
We focus on the struggles of the soldiers that are fighting, are either winning or losing.
Heroism part.
Exactly, heroism, but he expands the scope of war and looks at its impact on the entirety of society.
When it happened, he basically put an emphasis on the cost of war. The consequences, the political consequences,
Social,
the
right?
social consequences, economic consequences that involved a war in a scale like a civil war or even a world war like we have in the story. It seems like it's important for him to de-romanticize the Middle Ages in its fantasy context.
How? How so?
Like the first thing that comes up to your mind when you think about the Middle Ages,
Is knights.
knights, and famine, hunger, and intolerance, and whatever. But knights also, and
Like in the popular sphere,
yeah.
it's usually
knights.
knights.
Knights of the Round Table.
They're brave and
brave,
good.
honorable.
We're knights of the round table, our shows are formidable.
The Fistful of Crows is basically a book about the cost of war, the social cost of war, in which there are no good and bad people here. Everyone suffers, everyone is a loser.
Right. Okay, so how does he specifically de-romanticize the medieval world?
He shows us the true face of and the hypocrisy of the warrior class.
Right.
The entire justification of the warrior class and its privileges in society is that they protect the weak.
It's part of their oath.
Yeah, they protect the weak, they protect the people. It's basically a protection racket.
Okay, and in the
And
story,
they justify it by saying we are noble, we are kind, we are just. And in the story, they show the hypocrisy. It's just murderers, basically. They're murderers.
right, for hire.
They're for hire. They like to murder. They enjoy it.
Right.
The Hound says that.
Right. And he goes into quite an effort to tell us that there is a world in the song, and that world in the songs, in the sagas, whatever,
Yeah.
but that this world is not real.
No.
The real world, and since we live in the real world, we can obviously understand that the kings were not noble, that the knights were not necessarily good people.
No.
People there were just as now power hungry and corrupt in all kinds of ways. So why do we tend to romanticize this period to begin with?
Historically speaking, after the Middle Ages came the Renaissance, and after that the Enlightenment. So the view about the Middle Ages, even the choice of naming it the Middle Ages,
Right,
or the Dark Ages, it's like a judgmental way to address
Right.
it. We were backwards, but now we progressed.
And why is it the middle between?
Between the classical period, which was like
Rome and Greece.
Rome and Greece was perfect, smart, and stable, and the Enlightenment, the Renaissance and whatever.
Right.
But for every action there is a reaction, and for the action of like dissing the Middle Ages,
Right.
and saying they're dark and we were stinky and
Right.
stupid back
Right.
then.
And 1,000 years just in between.
Yeah, and we need to be rational and smart and whatever.
Right.
There was a reaction to that, which is the Romanticism, the Romantic movements of the late 18th, 19th century in Europe, mainly in Germany, which basically saying rationalizing the nostalgic feeling towards something simpler.
Right.
To a time when it was simpler,
Right.
men were men, women were women.
Right. We're overthinking things now.
Exactly. We were emotional, we were authentic. We were authentic. It's an authentic period, and we need to raise the values once again. And they started romanticizing the Middle Ages. I don't think everybody wanted to go back to the Middle Ages, but
Right.
they say at least in terms of value.
Right. We used to be honorable. We used to be good.
And emotions are important, and
Right.
and symbols, and dying for something.
Right, and our politicians now, they're crap, but back then they were good and they thought of the people.
Yeah, swords. It's you kill their guy. You see the guy you kill. You don't shoot him from 100 feet.
And because of this, it has become intertwined with fantasy, synonymous with fantasy. Fantasy, since Tolkien has been romanticizing this period.
Yeah.
So in comes Martin and says, no, let's think about it logically. Men were back then just as they are now. and people were raping and killing and pillaging and destroying, so there's no reason to romanticize it, and so this effect makes the story very powerful.
Yeah. He basically devoted an entire book, Feast for Crows. Even the name, Feast for Crows, it means, okay, this is about the cost of war. Now the crows are coming, they're eating the carcasses.
And you see that in Brienne's journey, and going nowhere, and we know she's going nowhere.
We know she's going nowhere. We know she's not going to find anything. But
so why
suffer after suffer after suffer?
So this is the reason you think that there are so many Brienne chapters about her journey that doesn't make like a, by itself, there's no narrative sense to it. Because we know that what she's looking for is not there, so we're not very engaged in it.
No.
And we also see that Arya with all the low-born people that she's with, like in Harrenhal, and also famine in King's Landing, and then the Sparrow movement.
Yeah.
So you can see that there are, and the Septon Maribald and all that shit, you can see that there is a real consequence to this war that you do not see in other fantasy stories. In Lord of the Rings, there's like a glimpse, one part, like when Saruman burns some villages in order, like in Rohan, in order to turn them into action. But that's like the only part of the entire story that deals with like the regular people and their suffering from this war.
Yeah, it's not only about the suffering. There's a cost, a social cost. There's changing loyalties. There are upstarts, new players that before that had no chance. You see that from the show, Lyanna Mormont, a 9-year-old girl ruling a noble house.
Right.
Because there are no men, you know.
Okay, does that remind you of anything historically?
It's a good choice by Martin. I would say it's a postmodern or new historian's way of looking at things, not just look at the consequence of war by who won.
Right, and the 1%.
Exactly, but by enlarging the scope, and then you can say like World War I, maybe you can argue was a good thing that happened for the feminist movement. Because it killed a lot of men, you know.
They hate men? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Millions of men and young men died in the war, and you have to have women to fill the gap and whatever, you know. And it broke something of the
of this romanticism, because the war, the violence was so senseless they couldn't arrange it in this story, in this narrative, and then actually it spurred like a new thing of like literature of cost of war, how horrible the war is, World War I, and war, everything is senseless and stupid, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we look to more contemporary examples of costs of war, of course, in Syria, you have a civil war, and the cost of war is not only the people that die, the displaced, the refugees, and it spills outside, and the cost of war now can be global and not be restricted to just where the fighting is, because now there's not so much fighting, but the cost is basically almost global.
A more closer example maybe to the story is the 30 Years' War.
Okay, who fought that war?
It was a war in the middle of in Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, the German principalities. Basically, it was a religious war, or a religious pretext to the war, but it was rearrangements of power structures in Europe.
The Protestants and Catholics.
Protestants and Catholics, and principalities inside the Holy Roman Empire that wanted more, and whatever. And millions of people died. I think, in terms of scale, even maybe more than the Second World War.
Compared to the size of
the population, yeah. And the consequences of that was a sort of a start to religious tolerance in Europe. And the start of this meme, of this, you know, cultural gene of separation between church and state, or leaving the secular state to have its own responsibilities and boundaries, and the religious part of the society to have its own boundaries. And the peace treaty of Westphalia that ended the war said basically that Protestants can live under a Catholic state.
And it's fine.
And a Catholic can live in a Protestant state. And we're not going to make a fuss about it.
Okay, so let's take this example and let's try to use it in order to make a... If we talk about the cost of war and how it played out in real history, what can we maybe guess about where the story is going?
The War of the Roses is like,
Big inspiration.
big inspiration to the story, and the way the War of the Roses ended was a decimation of the noble classes. I mean, the noble class was still the most powerful and privileged and entitled in the society,
Still had
but the
queens and
noble
kings.
houses did not hold as much power as they used to, and
They were weakened by the
they
war.
were weakened by the war, and power started to become more centralized. And it was easier after that
Right.
to create this absolute monarchy,
Right.
and even to withdraw from the church and put an emphasis on a local identity as Englishmen and stuff like that, and unite a
Right.
state and a
Right.
religion around it.
So the houses, the warring houses, all got taken down a few notches. A lot of people, and they lost a lot of armies and men, and a lot of political power. So that created an opportunity for one person to take over everything and have more power. Because so maybe this war in the story, the War of the Five Kings and whatever, will create a political opportunity for someone to take over and unite the whole Seven Kingdoms.
It's War of the Roses, but magnified tenfold, because Westeros is bigger than Britain, and
They have dragons.
they have dragons and
White
White Walkers, and they have refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees from the
Foreigners,
north,
right.
and foreigners. So the cost of war will be significant here. And the noble class didn't only lose a lot of his political power, he also lost a lot of his political capital to convince the masses to believe the idea that they are just, that they are noble. And that's very important, and
Right,
that
that they're worthy.
That happened in the 30 Years' War, and that happened in the First World War. People start when they suffer in war, and nobody wants war except psychopaths. And when they see they lose everything, they usually stop believing the story about the society, why
Right.
society it is what it is. And
Right.
now in Westeros, they see the Game of Thrones between the noble people, and they suffering, and
Right.
the wolves bite me, and the
Right.
lion
Right.
eat me.
Right.
And,
And there's no way it makes sense for Martin to put such an emphasis on the cost of war and then not have it pay off in some way and mean something towards the end.
yeah.
Okay, what do you think? Do you agree? If you enjoyed the video, please click like, and we would like to ask you for your support on our Patreon page. Like, the YouTube money is basically almost nothing, it's insignificant. So the way we sustain this channel is thanks to our patrons. So that will help a lot, even like $2 a month, and we give you all kinds of stuff, and we can talk a little bit and stuff. So check it out, check the link in the description, or just go to patreon.com/GOT Academy. That would be truly appreciated. So we'll see you all next time. Bye, and thanks for watching.
We're knights of the round table, our shows are for mid-able. So many times we give and rhymes that are quite unseemable. Well, rock a mad in Camelot, we sing from the diaphragm.